And now I'm going to speak especially for those of us Jews who have been disappointed because we learned in Hebrew school that we Jews supposed to be one way. We have these ideals. We are a light to the nation. We are, we're supposed to be ethical. We're supposed to be people who care about the world. We're supposed to be. We're supposed to have a God who's merciful, who's compassionate. But then we see the reality of how we get along or not at the synagogue. The subtitle of this section is Kabbalah and Midrash for today. Let's jump right in. There are several ways to respond to this problem. One is to bring to the forefront the Kabbalistic language of sparks, which is a universalistic language within Judaism. This language speaks of divine sparks which reside within everything that has been created. The function of a Jew in this world is to release those divine sparks by dedicating all this worldly activity to consciously reconnecting the pieces of creation to their source, capital S, by means of the practice of mitzvot, Jewish spiritual practices. Divine commandments which can only be fulfilled in this material world, and berachot, or blessings, through which we consecrate each act. So a mitzvah with a consecration through what's called a bracha, or a blessing. Beyond that, we say that every nation has its role to play in the gathering of those sparks. So you see that this is a very interesting, a unique Rabbi Zalmand deep ecumenism approach. That honors not only the particularism in our faith, but really the particularism in all other faiths. We're gathering the sparks through mitzvot. How are they gathering sparks? They too are part of the redemption, of the rectification of creation. Beyond that, we say that every nation has its role to play in the gathering of those sparks. Finally, we say that the Mashiach, the Redeemer, Mashiach is Hebrew for Messiah, the Redeemer will come only when all the sparks are gathered together. This image of light and of individual sparks is a powerful and effective way of describing the universal yearning from within the particularity, which is Judaism. It provides metaphors, word pictures, which convey our deepest intuitions about the potential of a human being. Intuitions which do not even have definite form. This Kabbalistic language leads us to the second approach, the way of Midrash. Traditionally, Midrashim are interpretation stories based on the Bible. Such stories might begin with, quote, "Once there was a king who had a son whom he wanted to become king. end quote. This is another wonderful way of trying to express deep intuitions which don't really have form by giving them the form of stories. I mean, language is always the challenge. When we're talking about the divine, the intuitive, the divine, the spiritual, even the philosophical, we're talking about things that are greater than language, and we're trying to encapsulate them in language. So Midrash is one of those Jewish forms of trying to encapsulate the grandeur, the mystery, the deep inner dynamics of life in the form of a story. The second approach seeks today's Midrash, today's process by which intuition can be given form, tentative descriptions, rather than sharp definitions. And what Rabbi Zalmand is doing here, which is really beautiful, is talking about what is today's Midrash. How do we tell the stories of today? Obviously in a language, for us, for Jews, in a language that's compatible, that's consistent with the traditions of the past. But the story needs to be today's story. In other words, this is why he gave an example of many Midrashim talk about a king, the parables of a king who wanted his son to do so and so. And typically what that means is that the king is referring to God and the son is referring to us, to Israel. But that's the language of the past, the language of 2 millennia ago. How do we talk about it today? In the language of quantum physics, of string theory, of evolutionary theory, modern theoretical physics, modern theoretical psychospirituality, right? All the new things that are coming into consciousness, into the world of ideas, of ideation. And those fresh ideas can serve us as we Jews update our language to be relevant and to be alive in the here and now and today. There is a third approach, one which I can best illustrate through an experience of my own, which is instructive, even if difficult to recount. Once I went to visit Swami Muktananda, and what's good to know about Rabbi Zalmand, about his background, is that he was a professor of comparative religions in actually Temple University in Philadelphia. And he really had the opportunity to study all traditions, all religions. He was extensively knowledgeable. And he would maintain relationships and contacts with spiritual leaders of all different traditions, Hinduism and Buddhism and Sufism and different sects in Christianity and Sufism and Muslims. And, and he not only studied those from books, but he really maintained dialogue with leaders in all of those different traditions. So this is one visit of many to Swami Muktananda, which I would take, I think, I don't know for sure, but I think was a Hindu spiritual teacher who was very popular here in the United States. So it was very nice to meet him and to get to know him a little bit, says Rabbi Zalmand. He was a special being with great power who has transformed many lives. I wanted to see for myself who he was and how he did his work. What kind of presence did he have? How did he feel to me? I have seen many kinds of Rebbes, both Jewish and not, and I wanted to see what kind of Rebbe Muktananda was. I had bought gifts for Swami Muktananda, some fruit, a challah, and a copy of the Tanya in English. And the Tanya is the seminal work of the founder of Chabad Lubavitch, of Rabbi Zalmand of Liadi, and this is in the 19th century. And Rabbi Zalmand was, until he left Chabad, he was the follower of the Rebbe Yitzchak, Yosef Yitzchak, not the late Rebbe, but the one before him. And anyway, that is a little bit of the background and the reason that he brought a copy of the Tanya. I figured that sooner or later, one of his Jewish disciples, Muktananda's Jewish disciples, would need a Jewish book, and Muktananda would hand it to him. A translator came to be with us, and as he came out, he said, "Oh, you're a rabbi." Jews are very particularistic. Hinduism is very universalistic. These are the words of the translator. Since the translator had already said that Jews were a very spiritual people, I asked him to help me with the translation. Quote, "Would you tell me, please, what is karma? I just need a translation since I don't understand these Sanskrit words." We went through karma, cause and effect, and dharma, the way. Then I asked him, "What is melecha?" He then started to splutter and blush. Now Rabbi Zalmand explains, this is the name in Sanskrit for the non-Bharati peoples, he answered, which was his way of saying that it is Sanskrit for a goy, a non-Jew. Melecha means literally eater of excrement. I led him this way because I just did not want to buy into his universalistic, when the truth is that they are also particularistic when amongst themselves. They can greet you in such a beautiful way by saying, "Namaste, I salute the divinity within you," which is the meaning of namaste, but they won't touch someone who isn't untouchable, as is the custom in India. So is it really so different when we greet another Jew with a handshake and a shalom aleichem, peace be upon you? The game he was playing is one which we also play. In general, its form could be called my ought against your is. For example, when you hear someone say, quote, "Judaism says that a person ought to be this and ought to be that, and look at what those goyim do, those Gentiles, those non-Jews," end quote. That Jewish person is going from his/her ought to the other's from my ought to their is. Then the Christian does the same thing to Jews. Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek," and Jews, end quote. This person also has measured his or her ought against my is. You see this, it's a very key trap, a pitfall in interfaith comparisons and so the knee-jerk tendency to open dialogue, which doesn't really work. Matching ought to be, right, the idealism of one faith to other oughts is what is fair in comparing religions. If you want to match ises, the way things are in reality, right? The real that is always short of the ideal to one another, that's also fair. Here's how we fail. This is how we actually manifest our religion in real life. Compare that to how Christians manifest their religion in real life, or Hindus, or anybody else for that matter. So that's fair. This can take the form of sociology, anthropology, or history. But it is not fair to compare one person's ought, or one person's religion's ought, his ideal reality with another person's is. His or her mundane and somehow compromised reality. And this is so key. It's so key to any attempt to have a real conversation, a real dialogue, and a real meeting on an eye-level plane with somebody with another faith. How do you handle your conversations with people of other faiths? How do you handle internally for yourself the disappointment? And now I'm going to speak especially for those of us Jews who have been disappointed because we learned in Hebrew school that we Jews supposed to be one way. We have these ideals. We are a light to the nation. We are, we're supposed to be ethical. We're supposed to be people who care about the world. We're supposed to be, have a God who's merciful, who's compassionate. But then we see the reality of how we get along or not at the synagogue, or in Israel, or how we treat the Palestinians, or when we read the Torah literally, God doesn't seem so merciful. And what sets in is such a difficult disappointment when the ought and the is have such a distance, so much daylight. So that's a disappointment internally. And then, what is it like as a Jew when my is, the disappointment, feels so small, so diminished compared to the ought or the ideals that I hear from a spiritual teacher who's talking from a different tradition, where I can hear all those wonderful things without any baggage, without any cultural involvement, with coming from this distance where all I need to take is the high ideal and perhaps the very high and refined presentation of a representative, a teacher from another culture who talks to me from the rarefied place of sitting outside of the baggage of his or her own culture. Challenging stuff, but really enlightening and really important to touch. This is where we're going to end today. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, for this lesson today. I'm Rabbi Ruben Molik with Hebrew Learning Circles and with Makom Halev Community here in Nyack, New York. Please like us, please subscribe, leave a comment below. Let's keep the conversation going. Shalom for now.